All right, so we're recording. Welcome everyone to the April 13th meeting of the Silicon Valley Agile Project. I'm very pleased to have Susannah Chambers all the way from the UK today, who is one of my personal agility colleagues and a fellow ambassador. So really excited to hear her presentation today. Just a little bit in terms of an introduction for her. Just give me a second here. She does have a broad coaching background along with some deep learning in various learning organizations. Again, she is a personal agility ambassador, and I'm very pleased to be presenting her today for her topic on her original talk on metrics. So with that, Susannah, you want to go ahead and take it away?
Thank you for that kind introduction, Gail. That's great. Okay, so let's just have a look here. So welcome to Metrix and Chill. So this is something that I created many years ago, actually. It wasn't always called Metrix and Chill. But actually getting involved with the personal agility system through the Personal Agility Institute was one of the prompts for me to get involved with it. Now, to get the conversation started, I want to play a little game because I just want to make sure, that we're feeling energized. I know some of us are here in the evening. We don't want to be like flagging before we even start. So I've got a little question for you, and I would like you to either in the chat or shout out an answer to this question. Okay, but I don't want you to type your answer until I say 3. So actually type it rather than say it, if that's okay. So in the chat, when I say 1, 2, 3, go, I want you to type your answer to this question. What do you think is the average length of duration of an elevator ride in New York? Okay, did you hear that question okay? What is the average length of duration for an elevator ride in New York? So hold that thought. 1, 2, 3, go. Okay, let's see what we've got coming through. Okie dokie, right, so we've got lots of guesses here. Well done everybody for getting involved. So we are going to need that information later in this session, okay? So just hold that thought, but that was just a little bit of a game to get us started, but that's going to be important. In terms of why I designed this system, Metrix and Chill, that will become apparent during the presentation, so I won't dwell on that now because this session is not about me. This session is about you and your reality in whatever context you're working, whether it's in a team context at work or in a team context in your everyday life, or indeed as an individual in terms of how you experience life. So I'm going to take you through now the approach. So who's heard of Simon Sinek? The author, the speaker, Simon Sinek, yeah? So what does Simon Sinek tell us? He says that we need to start with why. Now, this session is about empowering you with some strategies and insights for how you can articulate your value either at team level, whether it's in an agile coaching context or otherwise, or in an individual context. So you could start with why, but from a Metrix and Chill perspective, why not start with why the hell not, or who cares? And those two powerful questions are the ones that we're going to be exploring during this session. And I would welcome anybody, bearing in mind I can't see the chat easily. Okay, so if somebody can shout up, Peter, I think you've got your eye on the chat, haven't you? If anybody can shout up to me at any point, if you wish to positively disrupt this session, if you disagree with me, if you have a eureka moment, if you want to make a connection with something, that is completely fine to do that. Okay, so feel free. Okay, so in terms of outcomes for this session, I have 3 wishes for us to share in terms of outcomes and for yourselves taking part in this, because you know, you've put this time aside, and I'm very grateful to you for doing that. So my 3 wishes for outcomes from this session for you are: number 1, that by the time you leave, that you feel more empowered to articulate your value, whether, as I say, that's in a team context or in an individual context. Number 2 is that you feel able or more able to embrace the complexity of the environment that you're working in. And number 3, I hope that by the end that you'll feel in a better zone for maintaining your serendipity. So that word serendipity is like happy coincidence, right? And what we found through using the Metrix and Chill approach that I've used with software development teams, as well as in an education context, is that this framework, because that's what it is, it's a framework for exploring how we measure what matters, how we make sense of what really matters to us, and there's going to be the connection made with the personal agility system in that respect, and also to have the confidence and the freedom to explore that. Okay, and crucially, you can see here, the mindset is that it's not just about the outcomes, okay? And it's certainly not just about the outputs, which, as we know, metrics do tend to be very focused on the hard facts, right? Very often people expect us to have the figures, you know, the percentages, etc. And actually, through Metrix and Chill, there are some great examples of where people have actually told very powerful stories through this. So the value of this framework and the approach is also in the journey of the pursuit to understand the metrics, both at that very granular level, you know, in terms of the day-to-day perhaps, or a particular aspect of a product, and also at a holistic level in terms of the ecosystem of an organization. And of course, in a personal agility context, that ecosystem, the holistic ecosystem, is your life. All right. So this is all about empowering you to make choices that are going to drive value and that you can use to describe that value. And I've mentioned here that there are some synergies here with the systems thinking perspective. Okay, so we often hear, don't we, that we live in a VUCA world. You know, this is all about articulating your value amidst complexity. There's that recognition there already that we're working in a constantly complex environment, increasingly complex environment. So through Metrix and Chill, you can gain strategies to, 1, translate data and feedback into powerful stories. Secondly, reveal the value that's driven, as I say, through teams or individuals from your perspective. Thirdly, this approach can actually help you be in a position to coach others to achieve both those things above. And fourthly, this is all about really ramping up performance and insight and understanding of metrics and value, but actually driven from within the teams or within yourself. So where I'm talking about a team in a personal agility context, of course, you are the team, right? So in personal agility, you are the team. I mean, one facet of the personal agility system, if you actually Google Personal Agility Institute or Personal Agility System, you'll see one of the key facets of the personal agility approach is this idea of celebrate and choose, in the same way that an agile team would have sprint retro, for example, that there would be the ceremonies, you know, to actually really identify where has there been the success and what can be used to improve. So there's a direct parallel there. Okay, and I've made the point that Metrix and Chill literally can be applied in any sector. It's not just in tech, it's not just in an already established agile environment. This can be any environment. Okay, now from a personal agility perspective, I've kind of touched on this a bit. Metrix and Chill can be really powerful to help individuals turn up to teamwork in a work context. So very much a lot of the conversations around value and understanding value tend to presuppose that there is already an established foundation of culture for teams to understand what value looks like, you know why it's important, know who they need to influence, right, as stakeholders. And actually my own personal experience from working with teams over the last 2 decades is that culture actually does need nurturing to really, really get those powerful stories coming from teams and individuals to explain this is what we're worth, this is what value we've created, and this is why it matters. So that's the first bit. The second bit from a personal agility perspective is this concept of understanding choices based on what really matters. So we're going to explore this live on the call later. Okay, the third bit is about mindset. So we're going to touch on that. And fourthly, it's this idea that the Metrix and Chill approach I'm going to take you through from a more purist, not blended with personal agility perspective, can link beautifully with personal agility tools such as the priorities map and breadcrumb trail and the stakeholder canvas, along with some other tools. Are there any questions on that so far? Okay, so we're in our theatre, right? We're going to go on a journey together. So I've got my little magic carpet there, if you want to suspend reality in the showbiz world. And we're going to go on a journey of storytelling through metrics that I hope you will join me to co-craft in this session. And of course, the pursuit of metrics is actually brilliantly suited to an agile way of working, okay? Because as you'll discover as we work through this process together, you've got stuff in there about experimentation, iteration, telling stories to influence change. And there are key elements of this that I would ask you to bear in mind as we're going through this. So one thing is when we're looking at metrics and when we're trying to understand, well, if we're trying to evidence our value, either in a team context or me as an individual, you as individuals rather, what is there out there? What intelligence, what insights, what facts or assertions do we have to work with? What is our material that we can use to craft stories to evidence that? And also crucially, not just what is there, but what is missing. Okay, so what is silent? Because as we know from non-verbal communication, right, that the stuff that isn't said or the stuff that isn't there can sometimes be as pertinent as what actually is there. Does that make sense? Okay, so the framework of Metrix and Chill is not a quick blast approach. Okay, so the teams that I have worked with on this, they've got an increment of value generated from the very first session of using Metrix and Chill, but really for there to be the full result, it usually, oh, is somebody trying to say something? No? Okay, all good. So it's something that can be used iteratively, as I say, over many months, over however many sprints you wish. The cadence for this that I've tended to use is for the main sessions to be quarterly with monthly iterations and inspect and adapt sessions. So as I say, when we start moving through this together, you'll get more of a sense of this. Okay. And bear in mind that bottom bullet point there where I asked you, what was the average length of the elevator ride in New York? Okay, because one of the things that we're going to practice is something called value statementing, which I've incorporated in the approach. And it's this idea that in an ever rapid world of communication, the elevator pitch actually is too slow. If you're looking at articulating your value, or from a personal agility point of view, you're trying to understand how you're making progress towards your goals. This needs to be a rapid turnaround nowadays. Okay, so curtains down for a bit. Are there any questions from anybody? I'm not sure whether there's anything in the chat so far, anything anybody wants to clarify?
Not until now.
Okay.
If anyone says, I'm watching the chat, so if anyone asks something, I'll be sure to jump out and encourage them to speak up.
Perfect. Thank you, Peter. Okay, and sorry, before we move on, I must give a shout out to my good friend over in Australia, Marcus Ward, who very kindly did these hand-drawn illustrations for me, especially for this presentation. So,
do we have an artist in the family?
Sorry?
Do we have an artist in the family?
Well, not in my family. No, I mean, Marcus,
Our
he doesn't.
Family.
Oh, in your family. Oh, yes, I don't
personal
know.
agility family, yes.
Okay. It's a good point, actually. I don't know, and I could do with knowing for the future as well if I ever need to call on anybody, because I definitely can't draw. So that's one to explore. Any artists on the call? Okay, well, curtains up then. Right, so we're going to get ready now. We're going to go into the next act. Right, okay. What do you see? Anybody? Where do you think that picture was taken?
Buckingham Palace? No, it's not Buckingham Palace. It's a stately home somewhere.
It is. It's Buckingham Palace.
Okay.
Was that John?
Yes, yeah.
Thanks, John. Yeah, so that's Buckingham Palace. And who's that there in the foreground?
That's you.
That's
It
you.
is me. Do you know what? This is one of the first times I've done this presentation and somebody hasn't said, is that Princess Eugenie? So that's nice to actually be recognised. So yes, that was me at Buckingham Palace in 2016 at the Queen's Royal Garden Party. And the question here, as you can see at the bottom, is who's the odd one out? So we're going to play a bit of a game. Okay. So another case of, do you recognise? And I'll apologise to colleagues that are elsewhere other than in the UK, because perhaps some of these characters may not be as familiar to some of us in the UK, but well, how about that guy? Who's that?
Hancock.
Hancock. Well done, whoever that was.
I thought Nicolas Cage. Anyways.
Yeah, well, he's got a bit. He's got a bit of a look about him, hasn't he? I've not thought of that, but yeah, this guy's called Matt Hancock. So he's a politician here in the UK. And next one, who's this one?
Osborne.
Yeah, well done. I don't know who the colleague is that shouted those last two out, but that's brilliant, spot on. So George Osborne was the Chancellor of the Exchequer who dealt with finances in the government about 4 or 5 years ago. Now, any thoughts? I mean, there are some obvious answers to this question, right? Who's the odd one out? but the question is from a metrics point of view. What kind of metrics do you think Matt Hancock and George Osborne, being part of the UK government, might have been interested in?
GDP.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so kind of hard fact financial stuff. Yeah. Any other suggestions? And of course, this is relevant to colleagues dialing in from all over the world. You know, if you think about your own governments and the kind of metrics that government ministers, you know, will be using to inform their decision making. Any other ideas? We've had gross domestic product. Any other ideas?
So odd in which sense? Just being odd as a person?
Well, now you've touched on a really brilliant point, which has actually led me down an avenue that I'd hoped to explore later, but you've actually brought us to it sooner. That's the point, right? Okay. Some of you have never heard of these people before. Yeah. There are a lot of people that might be gathering metrics or trying to evidence their value for an audience. They've got no idea who it is. They might be faceless. They might actually not know who they're delivering these stories to in terms of articulating the value. Now, the connection between myself being at Buckingham Palace and Matt Hancock and George Osborne was I was, in a way, liaising with these two through my national policy role in education, which was strongly reliant on metrics and articulating stories about impact. So I was lobbying the government. And of course, as government ministers, the classic situation, which is highly relevant to agile teams or any other team or individuals indeed, is that very often if people are trying to prove a point about whether there's been an impact for a particular course of action, people tend to gravitate towards those hard facts, right? But we know surely, I mean, I know as an agile coach, I mean, I'm a certified Scrum Master and Agile coach as well, and I know from the teams that I serve, a lot of those most powerful, profound shifts in team behaviour, and indeed on a personal level with my own personal agility story, could not possibly be evidenced by hard figures, okay? So I was the odd one out because I was the only one that was looking at adult learning provision in this case being evidenced by metrics that were not just hard metrics, but that were softer or richer and were coming from a variety of sources that you couldn't actually put on a budget sheet. And the connection with Buckingham Palace was that the government thought I did such a great job of it that I got invited by the Queen to go to the garden party. So that's the, so that's the nice outcome of that metrics story. Right, so moving on. So Metrix and Chill is made up of 7 elements. And I'm not going to go into each of these individually on this session. This is something that I go into more on the separate training that I do. But we've got the GROW model in terms of professional coaching, gap analysis, Pareto principle, your classic 80-20. Number 4 here, which is crafting the basket of measures, which we're going to have a go at during this session. Number 5 touches on principles of social return on investment. Number 6, personal agility, hence me cross-referencing as I'm talking to that system. And number 7, value statementing, which is the other element of it that we're going to have a go at. Right, so we've got 4 stages that can be followed in sequence, but again, as you'd expect with an agile approach, they don't need to be, right? So the only thing that does have to be in a particular sequence is stage 1, metric scanning, which is about understanding what metrics we can work with. That has to come first. Okay, so if you're embarking on this journey, either with a team or you're looking at this for yourself in a personal agility context, that has to come first. And stage 4, about normalizing metrics. So this is about making it more kind of an embedded part of your team's daily experiences, you know, whether it's with agile ceremonies, Scrum, whatever, that has to come last in the iteration. But stage 2 with the basket of measures and stage 3 with the value statementing, you can use those as standalone approaches, however you wish. Right, so Act 1 then. Does anybody recognise this film?
Isn't that Mickey's Christmas Carol?
That's a really, really good guess. Yes, you're right. It is a Disney one, isn't it? Do you recognize? So who's the duck? I'll give you a clue. I'll give you a clue. Written by a very, very famous British author.
Scrooge McDuck.
Correct. Scrooge McDuck. Right. So it's Scrooge, right? So it's from the film A Christmas Carol, right? Okay, so you were on the right lines with that. So Scrooge McDuck, and who are the 3 other main protagonists, the main characters in that film or that story? You've got the ghost of
The past, the present, and the future.
Brilliant. Yeah, so they're the 3. And they are, as you will see, very, very strongly relevant to Metrix and Chill. Okay, so we've got this flow that I've talked about. So this structure here, okay, these are the phases that I have with great impact positively worked with agile teams, but also non-agile teams to take them through understanding how they can improve articulating their value. So here on the left, you can see, first of all, we look at what metrics do we currently use? And I would ask you now, if you can, to really kind of get yourself in a place mentally where you're thinking about, you know, your own work context, but also perhaps your own life, okay? So I invite you to go on this journey with me. And what I would also invite you to do as we're going through this, I shared in the chat the link to the Trello board, yeah, for the personal agility system. So don't worry about the columns and stuff at this point, but if you have any thoughts, if you have any eureka moments, if you just want to put them on there on your own copy of the Trello board, I hasten to add, okay? And I am purposefully not creating any online collaboration board for you, because in the true spirit of Agile, you are self-managing teams, right? So have the freedom to set up your own board, whether you want to set up your own Jamboard or Miro or whatever you want to do during this session as your own placeholder, or pen and paper, whatever works best for you. So what metrics do we currently use? So have a think about this at the moment in the context of your own team or your own life from a personal agility perspective. You can see here it says, forget the past and the future. And this is actually harder than it sounds, to really just be very, very present and focus on the metrics that you currently use. So I'd invite you all, either in the chat or on your own board, Jamboard, whatever you set up or write down, have a think about what metrics do you currently use to understand the value that you drive. So whether you're going for your sprint goal in a Scrum team, or if you're, going after a personal goal and you're trying to understand, well, how could I know if I've achieved this? What information do you use for that feedback loop to actually check in and think about whether you actually have achieved what you wanted to? Okay, so that's the first stage, the present. Now, next, we move on to what metrics could we use? So this is where we almost go to the ghost of future, okay? So now we're forgetting about the past and the present. We're now completely just going into the zone where we are horizon scanning for all of the metrics that perhaps we've never used before, but we're conscious are out there, or we've heard people talk about them. Or, for example, I say forget the past, but, there might be instances where a team or you in the past, whether it's journaling or, like the priorities map and breadcrumb trail that I've shared the link with you for the personal agility system, there might be approaches that you've used in the past that for some reason have fallen by the wayside, but actually you think, well, it is an option. I could start using that again. And the key thing with this stage is that you don't objection handle, right? You don't let any kind of doubt or, but no, that won't work, you completely just block that out, okay? And you get down in a place, the full picture, it might be post-it notes for what could you use, okay? Now, the next stage is you pop your metrics into the basket. Now, what I mean by that, and I do this on the Jamboard, and again, in the more detailed training I go through this and actually show how it's done on a Jamboard. But what you do is you look at the two things you've just done. So what metrics do we currently use? What metrics could we use? And then a team or an individual can then choose which metrics are going to go into, I use this metaphor of a shopping basket, okay, or a shopping trolley, the idea that, you're taking metrics off the shelf to, to decide how you're going to measure your impact. So as I've said there, at this stage, you are not thinking too hard. You're going with your gut instinct and you're getting everything in a central place where you think, yeah, okay, those metrics are ones that I might consider or the team might consider. The fourth stage is here that you craft your team's basket of measures. Okay, so the basket of measures is where a team or perhaps you will come out with your most popular, your most likely, your best bets that you think are going to demonstrate the value that you're seeking to drive. And the way in which that I usually do that with a team is that we dot vote. So, team members usually have on the Jamboard, for example, 5 votes. And then you can see from the team picture that the top 3 then get put into their basket of measures for the team. And in the same way that a team will buy into a sprint goal, for example, in Scrum, it's the same kind of principle. So then that is where, when a team is really embracing this approach, they then face the challenge of really making themselves accountable. And a coach can obviously help with that, to infuse the daily working by referencing the basket of measures. Okay, so I mentioned earlier that this kind of big session works best in my experience to do it quarterly, a bit like a ways of working session for a team, but then monthly zoning in on one of the 3 metrics that the team has chosen for their basket of measures. And in the same way with personal agility, in terms of the idea of celebrating and choosing at the end of a week. It's that thing around looping round and actually checking in with the metrics that you had identified and saying, okay, can I demonstrate value against these metrics that I've chosen? Okay, so we're going to have a go at this now. Right. So again, remember, this is your time. This is not about me seeing what you're writing, because, you know, I don't know your realities. This is about you doing some work in your context. So what I'd like us to do is to just have a minute where you can silently but together get your thoughts down in your own context for what kind of metrics you think, you know, either in a team context or for yourself individually. So choose which context you would like to explore this framework in. And let's have a minute just in complete silence, just to give you a chance to get your thoughts down. And then if it's okay, I would love to ask for some feedback, either verbally or if people can put in the chat. Okay, so for the time being, you know, if you want to go ahead, take a minute. If you're not feeling quite in the zone yet, put the kettle on and we'll reconvene in a minute. Okay, so I am going to go unusually quiet now. So make the most of that. Right, so I think we're just about at a minute. Okay, so if I can just ask then, is anybody prepared to either shout up or put in the chat? I can't see whether somebody's put anything. In fact, I can get the chat up, can't I? I've just realised. Would anybody like to share anything that they discovered from going through that? Were there any metrics that you came up with in terms of how you judge your value? Let's have a look.
You could have them raise their hand as well, Susannah, with the system, and then have them just speak through it. That might be.
Yeah, that's great. Absolutely. I think that's a great idea, Gail. Thank you. Yeah, so do we have any volunteers? Is anybody prepared to share, you know, what context that they decided to do the activity in, or metrics that you came up with? Okay.
Hi.
Who's that?
That was John. I think it's tough. I think you need a little bit longer, I think, but it was interesting. I was in the present. I thought about some stuff in the present and then thinking about what I could use, but the stuff, there weren't really metrics. There are more things like signals, like connectivity and presence and noise or awareness or noise or sort of throng with others, if that makes sense, as things in the present that I use to determine, but I didn't really get to the kind of what I could use.
Yeah, but thank you, John. And you've touched on a really, really important point there, as did the gentleman earlier, right? So where, you know, somebody asks you the question, what metrics? Okay. Now, actually, from a metrics and chill approach, what you've described there is absolutely legitimate. Yeah. So what you've talked about there, that thing about presence, that is no less legitimate than any other metric. But of course, crucially, it depends on your audience, right? That's the bottom line. So in terms of metrics to articulate a team's value, or, you know, your progress in terms of value, ultimately it depends on who is looking at the metrics. Yeah, who is using those metrics to actually make a judgment about the impact. I mean, what are other people's thoughts? I mean, did you kind of relate to what John was saying there?
Nick is holding up his hand.
Nick, thank you, Peter. Yeah,
I'm
Nick.
sorry, you made the question a bit more about John there at the end, so I was going to share my own metric.
Yeah, go for it.
It was just kind of a binary yes, no kind of metric for me, but is the team meeting their goal?
Okay, yeah. So that's a good one, right? Because that's very, that presumably, provided it's crafted clearly, that's quite a tightly defined one, yeah?
Yeah, and then over time I can say like, oh, out of 25 sprints in a year, we hit our goal X amount of times.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, that's a great one. Yeah, thank you, Nick. Anybody else come up with any, whether in a team context or a personal context?
Susanna? Gail is suggesting that maybe some examples, if you could give an example, that might be helpful because people might be challenged to get their hands around it.
That's fine. Yeah, obviously I want to make sure everybody's had the chance to contribute. But yeah, I mean, to give an example in my own context, in terms of where that journey started with Metrix and Chill, for example, when I was going to the UK government with Metrix, what they tended to look for was the cost of an adult learning intervention per learner that enrolled, okay? Or what percentage of the learners enrolled in a particular year on an adult learning program achieved a particular level of qualification. But actually, we knew from being at grassroots level, we knew that the powerful stuff was around that learner voice type of thing. So it was, for example, the number of learners that had said that they felt less stressed as a result of attending adult learning, or the number of people that felt that they were more part of the community. They felt a greater fit, a greater sense of belonging in the community. Now, of course, to measure things like that, you can easily put loads of metrics, on top of those to measure that shift in sentiment, right? So, that's a whole different topic. We could do a whole different session just on how you measure that, whether it's with Likert scales or, all the research tools. But the point is, coming back to the examples that Nick and John have just given, that you can have metrics such as a goal that a team have agreed, so whether it's a sprint goal. But for example, in the tech environment where I've been using this approach, I use this with 3 teams, and all 3 of those teams worked in the same division of the organization, but they actually chose pretty different metrics depending on the application that they were working on, but also the range of stakeholders. And here we have a great cross-reference as well to the personal agility system, because again, if you Google about the personal agility system and look at the Personal Agility Institute website, you'll see one of the great tools available is called the stakeholder canvas. And the stakeholder canvas is all around understanding the drivers, what is of interest to different stakeholders, and you ask a certain sequence of questions. So in the same way with Metrix and Chill, you could have a sprint goal, you could have a team goal, you could make a statement like John said, for example, that thing around, well, there's just that sense of presence. The point isn't necessarily about the metric itself, it's about that dialogue with the audience who are going to use those metrics as a judgment, right? Okay. So in the adult learning context, our big challenge was turning that feeling that we just knew we had in the room into some documented examples, whether it's case studies or whatever. And provided we were clear about why those were the best evidences of our impact, that really was a very powerful transition. Because if you think about agile teams, I mean, I don't know about you, but I've worked in many agile teams where there's been very much a sentiment that it's command and control, right? So there are targets, there are corporate targets, there are metrics that people are expected to report against. And actually, day to day, many of the people, in my experience, don't actually understand who they're reporting it to, who those stakeholders are. So in the personal agility example, who would be being asked those questions? Who cares? Like I said at the beginning, who cares about the metrics and who cares about the value? So that's the key thing to actually think about metrics that are going to actually be something you can explore with your stakeholders. You know, I mean, have that conversation, you know, on a sprint review. I mean, teams I've worked with in Scrum, you know, that's been a really great tipping point for them as a self-managing team, where they've turned the conversation around, not just to showcasing what they've achieved during a sprint, but actually exploring and saying to the stakeholders, so these are metrics we've been looking at. We've identified these top three through Metrix and Chill. So in the example of one team, you know, with an application, a tech application, one of them was reducing time to fix an issue. The second one was reducing cycle time. And the third one was about reducing cost on the bottom line, okay? And that was a very unique blend of metrics for that particular team. Okay, so hopefully that gives you some more of an idea. Okay, does anybody else want to add to that before we move on?
Susannah, I might throw out an example of a company that I recently coached.
Mhm.
Their finance department wanted to make an app available, company internal. And well, the question why they were doing that was where the kind of the stakeholders were kind of going in different directions, which was kind of interesting. The group that was doing this, they wanted to put tools in the hands of the sales staff, which would enable them to generate more revenue. Okay, so you know, there were certain kinds of low-hanging fruit. This was an investment goods company, so there was kind of low-hanging fruits where they could kind of collect maintenance contracts or something fairly easily, and that might be one app that they could do, is make it easy to figure out where they have to ask, or you know, which customers they need to knock on the door of in order to make things happen. What was interesting though was that the metrics that they chose to evaluate the team by weren't related to revenue at all. They were related to, well, how many apps do we have, you know, deployed? They didn't actually care what the apps did. They didn't care if the apps produced any revenue. They just said, we have to have apps. Okay. And so the, you know, I think of, you know, what you measure is what you get. And if you measure the apps that are pushed out, well, that's what you're going to get. But if you know, here it might have been helpful to say, well, what is revenue that we're going to produce with these apps, or that we're going to be able to generate with these apps? And in other cases, it might be about cost savings. But it seems to me they could have been a little bit more focused on what they were really trying to achieve, rather than kind of a scorecard, you know, that kind of makes them look good, but doesn't really contribute business value.
That's a fascinating example, Peter. Yeah, and you've really nicely illustrated there the nuanced difference, right, between using metrics as a blunt instrument, you know, an instrument of power or domination effectively, as opposed to that drive coming from within the team, from the people that, you know, understand how those things can actually be more at granular level and pulling out those really important elements. Yeah. So thanks, Peter. Are there any other examples from other people's experiences or work, such as the ones that myself and Peter have shared there, that you'd like to share?
And by the way, if you want to share something, putting up your hand, you know, using the reactions button is a really good way to do it. It might be, depending on which version of Zoom you have. If you have an older version of Zoom, it's somewhere in the participants window.
Cool. Well, I mean, there'll be plenty of chances we're going through to sort of, you know, if you have a thought and want to shout up, that's absolutely fine. Okay. So, you know, I've described to you this idea of the basket of measures. Okay. So two things again that lead to that working really well. You know, one aspect, as many of you that coach will know, a classic coaching approach is called perceptual positioning. So it's sometimes called the three chairs, right? So you're thinking about it from different perspectives. So that's something that teams that have used this have found really valuable, where they've thought, okay, we've got that in our basket of measures, and we might be checking in monthly as a team to see, well, you know, in relation to what we're showcasing in our sprint review, for example, or, you know, when we're talking in daily stand-ups, have we actually considered how this looks from different positions? And I'm sure there'll be people on the call thinking, Susannah, are you kidding? We've got so much work to do. We haven't got time for this. And all I can tell you is that, you know, working in a tech environment, obviously, as we know, very, very, you know, rapid turnaround of things. And actually what this approach did was it really encouraged people to take a step back at a team level as well as at an individual level and take stock of it, you know, rather than just being very reactive about everything. And then the second thing there I've mentioned is about Irving Goffman's concept of framing. So again, it's a bit like the examples that you gave, Nick and John, you know, thinking about, well, it could be this metric, all right, but equally, it depends on how it's framed and it depends on who's looking at it. So that's a really crucial message through Metrix and Chill, to say, in a world that is driven by quite command and control use of metrics, you know, we all have targets. My message to teams through using Metrix and Chill is take the ownership back. So in the same way with the personal agility system and the synergies there with the tools through that, this is about not saying, oh, life is happening to me. This is about saying, you know, get your voice out there. You can help shape these metrics. You know, some of these people you think you're reporting to, they themselves might not actually understand, as Peter alluded to, what the actual real story is on the ground. Okay, so we're at 10 to the hour. So, you know, I'm aware that people might want a bit of a pause. So I'd encourage you, you know, if you need to make a cup of tea or whatever, feel free. But does anybody have any questions, or do you want to call me out on anything, or anything you know, identify with that we've covered so far? Okay, curtains up again then. Right, so Act 2. So what have we got in store on Act 2? So you've got your basket of measures. Okay, so now what? So the next stage with this, and, you know, as John said, I mean, clearly, you know, this is a microcosm, right, of going through this approach. As I say, teams that I've worked with this on, usually they would have, you know, a couple of hours to get their basket of measures in place. So I would encourage you after today, you know, to have a reflect on, either in a personal context for your personal agility journey, if you're choosing to go down that, what would be those what really matters things for you? So what are those things in life that are deal breakers for you, that you would want your behaviors and choices to align with? And in a team context, in an agile team, for example, you've got those metrics, you might be checking in on them, but so what? You know, if nobody sees those, and you know you've just got those going on in the team, what's the point, right? So the solution that we found to this is to then build on having this basket of measures and extending it to an approach called value statementing. Now, this is not the same as value propositions, right? So it relates to it, but it builds on it, and it extends and deepens the idea of value propositions. Okay, now you can see there at the bottom of the screen, you know, I've made reference to the fact that value statementing, so statementing is, I've made it a verb basically, so it's now a doing word. And the reason why I changed it into a doing word is because I really think, in terms of teams taking ownership of telling their story and explaining to people the value that they're driving, it's really important that that is not a done to thing. That's not a command and control thing, that actually there is that voice, you know, driven from within the individual and within the team to shape how that value is expressed. So moving away from this idea of being passive as part of an organizational narrative. Okay, so just coming back to the game we played right at the beginning. Okay, so do you remember where I asked you to guess about what the average duration of an elevator ride in New York is? Yeah, so I can tell you, according to Harvard Business Review, the answer is 118 seconds. So I don't know whether anybody wants to claim the victory for having got the closest to that. Is there anybody that wants to claim that? Who got the closest? If you want to scroll up, can anybody see who got the closest? I've not got any prize for you other than a much coveted Susannah virtual gold star in cyberspace.
Mia Johnson at 2 minutes. That's 120 seconds. That's probably.
Oh, who got that one?
Mia Johnson.
Mia, it looks like you won the prize, Mia.
So Mia, come on down.
I hope you like your Susannah Golden Star. Oh, wow, Nick's, oh, this is like a dream come true. Nick's just equated this to The Price is Right. I love this. That was one of my favorite shows.
Oh my God. Okay.
I
Okay.
Gail's loving that as well. I used to love that show when I was a kid. Okay, so well done, Mia. So yeah, so why on earth would I ask you to know or guess? Why on earth would I be asking you to guess the average duration? So think about the elevator pitch thing. Any ideas, anybody? Why would I have asked you to do that? So if an elevator ride in New York on average is 118 seconds, right? This classic perception of an elevator pitch, right? Think of that. What is an elevator pitch? What does that term mean? You know, when somebody says elevator pitch, what's the purpose of an elevator pitch?
You
Be
can
able to
convey
get
the
your point.
value.
Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was going to say an elevator pitch is to really be able to get your high level points across in 2 minutes or less. Well, you know.
Spot on, absolutely, Gail. Yeah, and it seems like an obvious question, but in my experience with Agile coaching, but also in terms of me going on my personal agility journey and getting to a position where I actually thought, can I quite quickly explain to somebody if they ask me about the value that either our team has driven or the value that I have created on my personal agility journey? And actually, in my experience, when you actually try that with people, people can find it very, very difficult if they've not put the legwork into thinking about it. So in the same way as people talk about, oh, get your elevator pitch ready, you know, for your business idea, right? Well, in a Metrix and Chill context, you are the business idea, right? So the team, the work of the team, how the team shows up, how the team presents itself in team health, for example, how you present yourself in a personal agility context in life, you're the business, right? So value statementing is all about taking those metrics that have been co-crafted into the basket of measures, taking those and really crafting stories around those in the same way that an agile team might craft a sprint goal. Okay, so we're actually going to explore this more deeply, and I'm going to give you a worked example just after we've reflected on the distinction with the value proposition. Okay, so there will be people on the call that will be familiar with the value proposition context. This example is from a higher education or university sector context, but as I've said there, it is equally relevant to the tech and agile context. So you can see there, you know, there's a quote there, you know, looking at 5 metrics to power your value proposition. And the question is asked in terms of the perceived ratio of quality to cost. What are the critical metrics that have the potential to change an institution's value proposition? So what I'm saying with value statementing is that a team or you individually can take that question, what metrics have the potential to change your team's value proposition, or what metrics have the potential to change your value proposition as an individual, and craft the stories around it. Okay, so in a personal agility context, as I've mentioned a couple of times now, and if you look at that Trello board, on the left, you can see there's a column that says what really matters, okay? And that's the synergy with Metrix and Chill, that, you know, what really matters, you know, is all about understanding what are these key categories, what are these key drivers that are important to change value proposition of an individual. Okay, so are you all with me still? Any questions? No? Okie dokie. Right, so I'm going to give you a worked example now of a team. This was an agile team, okay? 7 members in the core team creating an application for a mobile device, all right, in a tech environment. So They'd never done this before, okay? And a bit of a joke with the animation, you'll keep seeing it coming in, and I make no apology for the fact it's probably a bit annoying seeing it keep coming in. And I'm trying to emulate the fact that where the teams have been most effective doing this, it's because they've kept iterating. You know, they've not just left it as, oh, great, we've created a value statement that's going to demonstrate how we've created value and what we're worth, but they've kept revisiting it. And that's where it's been really powerful. Okay, so in this worked example, there was one bit of feedback on a sprint review from a stakeholder. So the stakeholder said, and this is a true story, this happened about 6 months ago. The stakeholder said, hey, this is great. The tweak that the team made on this app has saved the business around £25,000 per week. Right? So that feedback was shared on the sprint review. What do you think happened? What do you think the team did with that? Well, of course, it's a slightly leading question because we all know that teams are different, you know, and some teams will be straight on it and celebrating, right? Now, the particular team that received this bit of feedback in a sprint review was really, really not in a place with their team health to let that feedback land, okay? So literally that feedback happened in the sprint review. Nobody seemed to bat an eyelid. They just sort of were like, oh, okay, yeah, that's good to know. And then I noticed at the start of the sprint retro that there was a distinct lack of a celebratory atmosphere, and I just couldn't understand why. And in the same way, I mean, one of the things, it sounds bizarre, but one of the things as a professional coach, I have coached people around before, is about accepting compliments. Because as we know, in a personal realm, a lot of people find it quite difficult actually to accept compliments. And the same, of course, is true in teams. Unless you've got a team culture established where you get some feedback about the value or the perceived value that you get from a stakeholder, if the team is not culturally in a place to let that land and celebrate, then actually it's very difficult to make anything of that value evidence, okay? So that was the first bit of feedback. Now,
Susannah?
yeah.
Can I share something about this? Maybe you can confirm this. I read this somewhere recently, and I'm trying to figure out where I saw it. And some people have great difficulties accepting compliments.
Yeah.
And this was an explanation of why. Now, I don't know if this is the explanation or just an explanation. It might even be totally made up. I'm kind of stumbling around. This was so compelling, and now I can't remember where I saw it. But the problem is, when we get new information, our brain has to process it, okay? And it kind of decides, is this something that I need to worry about? Do I need to fight it? Do I need to push back on it? Do I need to run away from it? Or is it something I can let in? And apparently what happens with some people is, this is kind of the fight or flight decision. And apparently some people, the compliment comes and they're not expecting it. And it's kind of like an autoimmune, deficiency that, it should be letting this message through, but it triggers as if it were an attack, and so people either don't react to it or they push back on it. And I don't know, does this resonate with you, or have you seen anything to kind of confirm or deny this?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I see it all the time. I see it daily in my Agile coaching work. I see it through the professional coaching that I give. And in fact, Peter, I think I might have seen the post that you're talking about. And I think it was posted by a brilliant author called Ludmila Praslova, who I linked to.
Yeah, that could be,
yeah,
yes.
And so you've just explained the science really, really well. And you've exactly put your finger on the pulse of why I created this value statement and approach, because what the value statement element of Metrix Chill does is it prepares, it builds up, it trains the minds of people in the team or on an individual basis to be ready for that question, right? So, like you were saying, Peter, about the shock, yeah? So if you think about the elevator pitch idea, part of the reason why people find it difficult to come up with an elevator pitch is because they've not rehearsed it. They've not got an answer ready for the question, okay? So in a personal agility context, for example, if somebody has got a celebration partner, you know, whether it's your spouse or a friend or a colleague or your child, whoever, if you are not ready and you're not prepared to answer a question about, oh, okay, so what have you achieved this week? Then that can be really difficult. And my point about the elevator pitch thing is that, you know, in the olden days, an elevator pitch would have been 118 seconds. And as we all know now, if we're on a call, if we're on a Teams call or whatever, you don't get 118 seconds to come up with an answer. If you've got a stakeholder on a call and they ask you, what value have you driven for as a sprint, or what have you achieved this sprint? You're there, aren't you? You're immediately online and you need to give an answer. So that's a great example you've just given. Does anybody want to respond to what Peter's just said? Do you relate to what Peter's just said there in any way? This thing around value landing?
I was having a discussion. Go ahead.
No, sorry, you go ahead. Sorry, I've spoken quite a bit.
It doesn't matter. Maybe you have more interesting things to say. I'll be short anyways. I was talking about this topic with my master coach. I'm a systemic coach by background, and he explained to me that certain streams of research provided evidence that this might be actually a kind of mental immune system reaction, so as not to too much shake the beliefs of a person and not too much make her see the world in too much of a pinky way and take her away from what she would like to focus on, which are the problems. That would explain why certain people are more impacted by such positive statements, and some of them, especially the cognitively heavy people, have much more resistance to that because they immediately look for proof in that, and so look for counter evidence.
That's fascinating, Mario. Thank you. Yeah, and I'm absolutely sure that you're right. Thank you for sharing that. So, John, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I'm just a little bit of an amateur, but my understanding it's a TA and transactional analysis and ego states. There's something called the Carlo-Moisier feeling loop that describes authentic feelings and feeling those feelings authentically. But when people get stuck in a loop and they don't feel the feeling authentically, they deny the real feeling, and that can happen with danger, damage, loss, but also satisfaction, and they exist. I'll share a link to authentic feelings, and you get stuck in a loop until you can accept the true authentic feeling and resolve it back down to autonomy, spontaneity, and intimacy. You kind of get stuck in that loop where you don't resolve it fully. It links a lot into sort of transactional analysis, child, parent, and adult ego states, and your life script that you learned up to about the age of 5. That's my understanding. And then you play that on repeat, because obviously the strategy that worked when you were a child is the same strategy that you carry on playing in later life. But there's a lot of research and works that got into this that describe it.
Well, that's magic, and thank you for sharing that insight. And yeah, again, brilliant example, because as you know, as some of you on the call will know, because my background is understanding early education and learning, value statementing is exactly about consciously breaking in an empowered way that cycle that we've all learned, or many of us have learned as children, in terms of, all right, well, we'd better not shout too much about what we do because people think that's arrogant or what have you. But in the context of where you're actually needing to demonstrate your value, as in this case, that was really important that the team did something with that. So just hold that thought. So the team got that bit of feedback. Now, they revisited it, and they revisited it again through retro, okay? And then they got a different bit of feedback from the delivery manager, right? Now, this feedback came in complete isolation from that first bit of feedback in the sprint review, okay? So the delivery manager fed back that the team's operating costs per sprint are around 20K per sprint, right? So don't think about that too much. That's all you need to know, really. Those two hard facts in terms of metrics, right? One came in from one direction, the other bit came in asynchronously from another source. So through value statementing, I worked with the team for them to blend and experiment with combining different metrics. Now, as it happened, these two are the example I'm giving, but there were a variety of different bits of feedback that they'd scoped, and they were looking at the basket of measures. So when they'd actually worked as a team in the same way as they might craft a sprint goal, okay, and revisited, and revisited again. I'm just making the point that this is not a one-strike wonder thing. This is what they came up with. Any reactions to that?
The team is underpaid.
Okay, interesting response, and if well, a possibly fair assertion, yeah, based on that. Any other reactions to that blended?
My immediate reaction was looking at the linguistic aspect of this. I felt as if they had taken a meta position on their work as a team, and therefore accidentally, maybe on purpose, found a language that could speak to other people outside the team, in particular people who were interested in the ROI regarding investments in the team. But that's all speculation. I'm just saying linguistically, this sounds to me like they had taken a meta position.
Spot on, Mario, absolutely. Because as it happened, the motivation for the team creating a value statement was so they had their elevator pitch, or one of a suite of value statements that they could use as their elevator pitch, ready to respond to senior leaders, you know, if they were asked. Because one of the things they were concerned about, for example, was they went through a period of time where they were concerned around the fact that they didn't seem to be finding it easy to achieve their sprint goal. And yet actually, when they were looking at the metrics and looking at them and blending them in different combinations, they actually discovered that there were some quite compelling messages. So if you think back to those two different bits of feedback, okay, both of those could be interpreted standalone in a particular way. But the power for the team in blending those bits of feedback to say that the value of the savings generated through the team's work is at least double the operating cost per sprint. Very, very simple in one respect, but a very powerful experience for people to go through to create that shared understanding of the metrics that they were using. Does that make sense? So again, I would really like you to have a go yourselves now. Okay, and I've put there, you know, you iterate and augment. That's, as I've stressed, a really important part of this model. So what I'm going to do, given the feedback about having a bit more time to do this, because I really want to give you a chance to actually try this real time and for us to try and get some examples from people on the call. Are you up for me giving you a couple of minutes of silent writing, you know, working silently together for you to try and come up with your own value statement, either in a team context or in a personal context?
So Susannah?
Yeah.
What we might try doing, you know, kind of 3 minutes of silence is not really very exciting. What we might want to consider doing is putting people into groups of like threes and fours. Gail says we only have 15 minutes left, so that might also be a consideration.
But that's fine. That's fine. We could have 5 minutes doing that. I wasn't sure whether that would be possible to do that. But yeah, I mean, if we could have discussions in breakout rooms, that would be great.
Okay. Well, so we're kind of assuming that there are people at the other end of these, you know, all these, you know, sessions that don't have their video turned on.
Yeah.
So maybe if we could invite everyone, we'd like to do something a little bit interactive. You know, how would you like to, you know, kind of turn on your video just so we know that you're there and see that we can do something?
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think rather than the breakouts, why don't we just walk through with one, have a moment of silence for 3 minutes, and then one person can volunteer to load up their value statement, and we could go through it with everyone with such a small group, because otherwise you're going to have to go to all the breakouts, and it just doesn't seem like it would work well to me.
Okay, so what I'll do, just while people are starting to think maybe of what their example might be, however we do it, I'll give you one other example, both from a professional, like a team context, okay? And I'll give you one from a personal agility context. So this idea of taking two metrics, and they might seem completely unrelated, as I say, just it's all about experimenting and just trying to see the fit. So an example, for example, from personal agility, from my own journey, was one bit of feedback that I received was, "Mummy, you seem to be more relaxed." Okay, so that was one bit from my children. The other metric that I got was, "Oh, there's been a 25% increase, Susannah, in your income from teaching music online during the pandemic. Okay. Now, when I applied that myself in terms of my priorities map and breadcrumb trail that I've shared the link for, and I blended those two bits of feedback together, what I realized was there actually was a causal link. So what really matters was relaxing more, but then I blended it into a value statement to say, by increasing my income from teaching by 25%, I now feel more able to relax. So that's an example from a personal context. And then another one from a team context. And again, you'll see where this stuff can easily be misinterpreted, but it's about people owning it and understanding where it comes from. One metric that the team had was, we have not done any more work in this sprint than we agreed to do. And the second one was that the team has consistently met its sprint goal for the last 8 sprints, as evidenced by our sprint reviews. So with that example, somebody might look at the metric around, we have not done any more work than we committed to, and thought, well, maybe that team's not very comfortable, or maybe they're not very committed to the cause if, they're not being flexible and picking up some more work. But actually the value statement that they crafted by blending those two metrics together was to say, as a result of our team communicating boundaries more clearly, our team health has improved and our high quality performance has been sustained. And it was that was the message that was then shared with senior leaders. So coming back to your point, Mario, about who is your audience, right? You're crafting it to communicate a message to people that you're trying to influence around the value that you're driving. Okay, so is there any feeling in the room about how you might like to have a go at this, so we can do some live crafting from your own contexts?
I'm okay with both options.
Okay, so I mean, I've given a couple of examples there. So should we just have, again, so it's not too prolonged, taking on board the feedback from Peter and from Gail, let's just have another minute, just one more minute, silent writing, just see what you can come up with. There's no right or wrong answer with this, okay? The crucial thing is that it's actually helping you explore how could you in one statement demonstrate some value that might be more difficult to do so with isolated metrics. Okay, so I'll be quiet for a minute and then we'll regroup. Okay, so we're about at a minute. So what have you got for me? And even if you've not completely finished your value statement, if you're happy to, share some of the metrics you'd identified. Anybody prepared to share?
Mine doesn't sound so good, but I'm going to give it to you anyways. Mine is the number of goals I am after every week and every month, and the amount of time associated with a minimal achievement of these goals far exceeds the 300% of the time available to me during any week or month, respectively month. That's my statement.
Right, well done. I think that's a fantastic first attempt, Maru. Well done. Virtual round of applause. I'm very impressed. So can I just ask you, so from the sounds of it, that's in a team, a professional context, is that right? Is that like in an agile coaching environment, or yeah?
I'm sorry, you were talking. Sorry, no, that was my personal. I've been
Personal,
doing.
personal. Got you. Okay, so sorry, forgive me. So in a personal agility context, then, what you've just shared there, is that something, you know, that if you were thinking about how you would, for example, celebrate and choose, or you would reflect on, you know, your breadcrumb trail for what you'd achieved, for example, in a particular week? Because for those of you that are not familiar with the personal agility system yet, although I hope you'll get off this call and go and have a look at it on the Personal Agility Institute website, how would you usually make sense of what you'd achieved, Maru? You know, would you, how would you gauge, you know, whether you'd been successful in your endeavor?
Well, so that's an insight that I had gained some years ago. I started doing personal Kanban in 2014-15, and at some point, I think in 2018-19, I was doing Metrix assessments, because I was assessing every week and every quarter and every month. And so my last two strategies I've tried, I'm not satisfied with either one. I'm looking for another one. Where one, I defined additional metrics related to my personal well-being and happiness. And then I noticed that I didn't coach myself to care about them and use them properly. And the second tactic I used was clustering my areas of work and attacking each area of work individually over the course of a month, instead of tackling all of them at once. Still not working well enough. So I'm on the lookout for the third iteration now. Third improvement.
Okay, brilliant. Well, so may I ask you, I mean, I know obviously this is a very, very initial introduction to this, but how do you feel that value statementing might complement those other approaches that you've talked about there?
Oh, they were until now. Maybe I'll find more later, but until now they've been very useful into challenging my beliefs, both about what I had to do and about what I could do.
Okay, right. Well, I invite you to experiment with this approach going forward. Thank you for sharing your example, Mary. That's great. Is there anybody else that's prepared to share an example of what you've come up with? No, okay, that's fine, because as I say, this stuff isn't instant. You know, I mean, teams don't do this stuff on the spot, okay? And in the same way on a personal level, you know, it's something. Sorry, who's trying to talk?
It was I think Susannah, it's Maru. I think John was raising his hand, but he can't see.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I've got one, but I also noticed Heather has got one on the chat as well.
Oh, great. Okay, well, do you both want to go? Heather, are you able to go first, please, and then maybe John?
Yeah, sure. Working from home has allowed me to cook healthier midday meals, which has allowed me to focus better in the afternoon and therefore creating better code for my job. So that's improved my ability to be a team player.
Oh, that's great. Oh my gosh, that's brilliant, Heather. Wow. I love how you've linked all the causality. That's so cool. So if we just think back to the start of your value statement then, okay, so can we just top and tail it? Can we just take the first bit where you started? So what was the first bit?
Working from home has allowed me to cook healthy midday meals.
Yeah, okay. And what was the end bit? Where did you end up with your value statement?
Creating better code.
So case in point, okay, so in the day-to-day, would you ever have envisaged a situation where you would be having a conversation where those two factors as metrics of evidence of value, that those two would combine to create that chain of causality? And yet you've just demonstrated it, right?
Yeah.
Well done. That's brilliant. You've absolutely got the concept. Well done. Fantastic. Okay, thanks, Heather. So John, how about you?
I'm not sure I've done it right, but we'll see.
No right. There's no right.
No, okay. The value of the value in my presence and connections with others empower others, which I see in the noise and energy in others.
Beautiful. Lovely. And again, you know, this is not about there being a right or wrong. This is about, you know, if you were wanting to make sense of, right, you know, from a personal agility point of view, am I achieving what I want to achieve? It's the thing around looking at that statement and thinking, yeah, does that look like the value I would have expected to drive? So thank you, everybody, for having a go at that. That's absolutely brilliant. So keep remembering, you know, keep iterating on it and again, you know, keep going over it and finessing it. Right. So guide rails for value statementing, I refer to two principles from folklore, okay? So the number one is the Goldilocks principle, not too hard, not too soft, just right. So that taps into the point I made with John, that there is not a right, it's about that gut instinct. It's in social return on investment terms, you know, they often talk about the sweet spot, right? And secondly, the Little Red Riding Hood principle, okay? So think about your audience. So if, for example, with apps, you know, it's around a bit like Peter's point about the number of apps. Another classic in tech realms, of course, is about colleague adoption. So think about if somebody like a stakeholder is saying, oh, well done, team, what big colleague adoption levels you have, that you are ready with your value statement to say, absolutely, all the better to serve you with. And you then go on to say, I'm not suggesting you use that as a script, but that, you know, you are ready with the line. Okay. So as I say there, it's sophisticated, yet simple, right? So you've done that. Great. Okay. So remember, your combination of metrics, as we've seen and heard from the examples you've shared, might be quite unconventional. They might not logically look as though they stack together, but if you give yourself that time, individually as well as in a team realm, to explore and blend together and, you know, see how things fit together, you might be really surprised at what you come up with. Okay, so just to sum up, because we're approaching the end of the session, we've got a few minutes left. Think about these questions, okay? Now, you don't need to answer these. I'm just putting these out here for you to reflect on. So in the last few minutes, does anybody have any questions that you would like me to answer? And bear in mind, you can look me up on social media. I'm on LinkedIn, Susannah Chambers. I'm on Twitter at Susannah Chambers 1. So, you know, I'm more than happy after you've had a chance to reflect after today to answer any questions you've got on this stuff. But suffice it to say, you know, there are my handles. Suffice it to say, we've talked about the metrics bit. So you must be thinking, well, where's the chill bit, right? Where does the chill come in? Well, the chill comes in because now we've done the show and we've done all the preparation and the rehearsal of the metrics. We can go backstage to the Metrics and Chill green room. And now you can chill knowing that you're in a stronger position to know your worth and that you're in a stronger position to articulate that value to anybody who asks. So enjoy the after show party. This is what I'm imagining we'd be like if we're in the same building. And that's it from me. So in the last couple of minutes, are there any burning questions that anybody would like answering? And I'm going to stop sharing my screen now.
Okay. Susannah, maybe not a question, but I put a couple of links for people who want to find out more about personal agility into the chat.
Great.
So one, you know, there's a kind of the 5-word description of personal agility, a 5-minute introduction to personal agility and why you might want to learn it, and then finally there's a 35-minute keynote talk that I gave, kind of introducing the 6 powerful questions to change your life that make up the core of personal agility.
Oh, that's fantastic. Yeah. And I will just say, I mean, obviously Metrics and Chill is something that, you know, I personally designed, but obviously, I mean, personal agility system, it's been great kind of getting on board with that, you know, and I'm just so grateful to Personal Agility Institute, you know, and grateful to Gail as well for spotting the synergies between these approaches. So yeah, is there anything anybody else wants to ask or kind of comment on, you know, what kind of value or not?
Yeah, I wanted to comment, Susannah.
Yeah.
Thank you, first of all, for presenting great presentation, interesting exercises. Kind of a question or observation, you know, normally, you know, when we see value and doing value streams and the traditional way, you know, it's filtering up from a North Star that's set by the leadership. And then you're getting into your value proposition and it's kind of moving more top down. So with your method, you're kind of doing a bottoms up, if you will, that people are basically identifying, you know, what's valuable to them in terms of metrics and then creating their value statement. So now going the extra step of bridging that gap between the way that you do it and the way that it's traditionally done, how could you potentially do that? Or would it just generate maybe new value streams from the bottom up? I guess that's what I'm sort of curious about.
Yeah, well, that's a great question, Gail. Thank you for that. And what we've experienced is that by the teams actually feeling like they are innovating through using Metrix and Chill, because they feel special, because it's something that not every team, in the environment might be using, they actually then are so excited about the fact they're using this different approach. They talk about it openly in the sprint reviews, for example. When they're reporting to senior leaders, they're calling out the fact that they're using this approach, and they're therefore sharing, right, well, this is how we've gone through. This is what we've highlighted as things that we think are important. Can we have a conversation about it? Yeah, because like you say, Gail, otherwise it's constantly missing. It's almost like in silos, but we find that, again, it's so powerful, the teams themselves driving that conversation.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yes,
Pleasure.
and definitely for everybody, do look at the links that Peter provided. And thank you all very much for the presentation and for attending. And great job, Susannah. Thank you, Peter, for helping co-host. And hopefully we'll see some of you next month for our presentation. It will be on the sort of a brief on how the Agile Reflect 20 Festival went, which was the largest online Agile festival ever that was free. And that was back in February. So we're going to have a great retrospective on that. But once again, thank you, Susannah. Thank you, Peter. And goodbye to
Thank you
everyone.
again.
All right, take care. All right,
Thanks so
bye-bye.
much. See you soon. Bye.